this was never just a dress, and Katniss never agreed to wear it.
Like a Mockingjay.
Cinna, take a bow!
The moment she twirled on stage in that wedding gown, transforming into the symbol of rebellion, was iconic. But behind the glamour and symbolism was a choice Katniss never got to make. Cinna, the one capital citizen Katniss trusted, designed a dress and turned her into a political weapon on live television without her full knowledge. And while fans often praise him for it, I can't stop thinking, wasn't this manipulation too? Let's break down the moment Katniss was unknowingly turned into the Mockingjay. This is all based on the book canon of the Hunger Games. Katniss instantly liked Cinna, and as a reader, I did too. He was the first person in the story from the capital who had self-awareness and treated Katniss like an actual person. But then I started thinking more about Cinna's role in the rebellion, and honestly, he used Katniss just like Plutarch and Haymitch did to carry out rebel plans. She just never gave Cinna any heat for it. He had good intentions, but I think the halo Katniss placed on him hid his morally gray and manipulative actions. As a reader, I felt betrayed by Haymitch at the end of Catching Fire right along with Katniss, and we both ignored that Cinna also deceived her. So many of the adults in Katniss's life used her to further their own agenda. Cinna didn't have to lie in her face about the Quell nearly as much as Haymitch did, but he still deceived her. The morality debate over doing bad or questionable things for the greater good is an overarching theme of the Hunger Games series. What I see as Cinna's most morally gray, some might say exploitative act was putting Katniss in the Mockingjay dress. She did not know that her wedding dress would transform into what had become a major rebel symbol on a world stage the night before the Hunger Games. Ultimately, Katniss felt somewhat emboldened by this Mockingjay transformation and didn't harbor any anger towards Cinna, but she would have been completely justified to be furious that he did this without her knowledge or consent. Here's what went down between Katniss and Cinna before her interview for the Quarter Quell. Cinna tells her that President Snow put in the dress order himself and ignored the stylist's objections to putting Katniss in the wedding dress the Capitol crowd had voted on as their favorite months earlier. The dress in the book is quite different from the movie. Katniss describes it as heavy white silk with a low neckline and tight waist and sleeves that fall from my wrists to the floor, and pearls, everywhere, pearls, stitched into the dress in ropes at my throat and forming the crown for the veil. Ropes at her throat. Great choice of words. And of course, it's made of pearls, and Peeta went on to give her a pearl. Cinna helps Katniss put on the gown, and she notes it feels extremely heavy, weighing down her shoulders. She asks Cinna, was it always this heavy? And he responds, I had to make some light alterations because of the lighting, which is a lie. But to be fair, they couldn't speak freely at this moment since they were under surveillance. Katniss didn't think this explanation made sense, but she let it go. Then Cinna says, now, Katniss, because this bodice is so fitted, I don't want you raising your arms above your head. Well, not until you twirl anyway. He covertly signaled something will happen with this dress if she twirls and raises up her arms. But she has no idea what. Her dress the previous year gave the illusion of flames when she twirled, but she knew about this ahead of time, and it wasn't some crazy thing. And by the way, the movie version of this dress has a full-on fake flames like the chariot ride outfit, but this wasn't the case in the book. The dress is entirely covered in reflective, precious gems, red and yellow and white with bits of blue to accent the tips of the flame design. The slightest movement gives the impression that Katniss is engulfed in tongues of fire. And I love Katniss's reaction to seeing herself in full glam before that first interview. The creature standing before me in the full-length mirror has come from another world, where skin shimmers and eyes flash. I am not pretty. I am not beautiful. I am as radiant as the sun. It gives me chills. I love it. I really admire how Katniss's perception of her appearance is written. She's almost objective. Like, there's none of that, oh, I'm just a plain girl, I'm not pretty, that you see in a lot of other YA characters. I'm looking at you, Bella Swan. When Katniss is done up and made into a piece of living art, she can really appreciate it and doesn't berate herself when she's made unclean and messy due to circumstances like being in the arena. It just is what it is. She doesn't pair her self-worth with her appearance. Back to the wedding Mockingjay dress. After Cinna says the thing about not raising her arms, Katniss asks, will I be twirling again? And he responds, I'm sure Caesar will ask you, and if he doesn't, you suggest it for yourself. Only not right away. Save it for your big finale. From that, she knows to expect some grandeur when she twirls, but her reference for what that entails is that cool sparkle effect from last year's dress. She has no idea what Cinna has in store for her. I know Cinna can't exactly say what will happen over fear of being overheard, but he still is misleading her. Cinna doesn't want to jeopardize his rebel dress stunt, and this transformation doesn't just endanger endanger him. Katniss's safety is also at risk. Snow could order the game makers to do something extra awful to her in the arena or to her family. Perhaps Cinna felt it was okay since Katniss would have protection in the games from the secret rebel alliance and with Plutarch in the head game maker seat, but even though Plutarch was on Team Save Katniss, he still had to play his role during the games up until he slipped away onto District 13's hovercraft. In order to keep his cover, he could have ended up following through with one of Snow's orders to punish Katniss in the arena because of this dress. Cinna could justify keeping the secret to himself just like everyone else in the rebel plot, but that doesn't deny the fact Katniss was used by these people. She didn't choose to be the symbol of the rebellion. It was thrust upon her. Katniss then asked Cinna to give her a signal of when to twirl, and he agreed. Then there's this great piece of foreshadowing. Cinna asks her if she has a plan for her interview, and Katniss says, "No, this year I'm just winging it," and then she transformed into a bird. This is the only time Katniss ever said she's winging something in the trilogy. I did a keyword search on the ebooks. It's significant. And with that, she's headed to the interviews. She's not nervous at all and thinks that even if Snow hates her, the Capitol audience is hers. Katniss has no idea Cinna snuck a hugely rebellious element into her interview. I really wish Cinna was able to clue her into this and get her consent. He could have gotten crafty using some coded language about the long sleeves looking like wings, or I think he could have easily switched up what he said a bit to allow Katniss to make a choice about the dress transformation. After Cinna says, "Well, not until you twirl anyway," and Katniss asks, "Will I be twirling again?" Cinna could have said, "I'm sure Caesar will ask you, and even if he doesn't, I'll leave that up to you, depending on how big you want your finale to be." I know it's not much, but I think this plus the odd explanation as to why the dress is so heavy would get Katniss's attention that there is something important about this dress that Cinna is not free to say around capital ears, that there's some element of risk to twirling. I know Katniss has some difficulty around communicating and understanding emotions, but she is good at picking up the coded language of people close to her, like how she understood what Haymitch was trying to tell her in the arena through his gifts or lack thereof. Reminder, in the books, the parachutes don't come with little notes the way they do in the movie. I get why they made that choice in the film, but seeing those notes signed H makes me cringe. Like, there's something so juvenile about it. Am I the only one who feels this way about these notes? Anyways, I'm sure there's plenty of other ways Cinna could convey that twirling has much greater significance this year, and possibly a way to convey there is some danger, or that this dress makes a statement. I wish he gave Katniss some agency here. She can't know all the details, but she deserves to be given a choice and a heads up that this is more significant than showing off a pretty dress. What do you think Cinna could have said to tip Katniss off about this? Let me know in the comments. Though I do think Katniss most likely would have chosen to twirl if given the opportunity, since she trusted Cinna. When she steps forward for her interview, the sight of Katniss in her white silk bridal gown practically causes a riot. And her interview is very different from the movie. Katniss isn't joking around with Caesar. In the book, once Caesar is able to get a word in over the crowd, he says how it's an emotional night and asks if she has anything she'd like to say. And Katniss's voice trembles as she says, "Only that I'm so sorry you won't get to be at my wedding, but I'm glad you at least get to see me in my dress. Isn't it just the most beautiful thing?" Then she feels it's the right time to twirl. She does not look to Cinna for guidance the way she does in the movie. She lifts her arms and spins, and the crowd is screaming because she's engulfed in smoke and flames that eat away at her dress. It's scary for Katniss too. She's struggling to breathe until the fire suddenly stops. And for a moment she wonders if she's naked. There's also a big difference between the book and movie versions of the Mockingjay dress. In the book, it's exactly the same as the wedding dress, only it's the color of coal and made of tiny feathers with white patches on the sleeves. Her white headpiece is changed into a smooth fitted veil of black that drapes into the neckline of her dress in the back. In the movie, it's dark blue and a completely different design than the wedding dress, which is fine. I just think it's important that the dress was coal black. She's from 12, the coal mining district, and that's what Mockingjays are supposed to look like. Caesar then comments, "Feathers, you're like a bird." And Katniss says, "A Mockingjay, I think. It's the bird on the pin I wear as a token." And she flaps her wings a little. Katniss can tell Caesar knows Mockingjays aren't just her token anymore, that it's come to symbolize so much more, that what will be seen as a flashy costume change in the Capitol is resonating in an entirely different way throughout the districts. Important to note that regular Capitol people are not aware that Mockingjays are a big rebel symbol at this time, but the higher-ups know, and they're not happy. Caesar keeps his cool and praises Cinna, saying how this is the most spectacular thing ever to happen in an interview. He tells Cinna to take a bow, and he does. When he bows, Katniss is hit with the gravity of the situation. Suddenly, I am so afraid for him. What has he done? Something terribly dangerous, an act of rebellion in itself. And he has done it for me. I remember his words. "Don't worry, I always channel my emotions into my work. That way I don't hurt anyone anyone but myself. Katniss, you should also be afraid for yourself. He didn't just do this for you, he did this to you. He's not the only one who can be hurt by this. Cinna's words that she's recalling are from a conversation they had before the chariot ride. He was sort of joking about how he won't be crying over her like the rest of the prep team. Katniss is only thinking about the effect the dress will have on Cinna, and I'm afraid he has hurt himself beyond repair. The significance of my fiery transformation will not be lost on President Snow. And yeah, Cinna did damage himself beyond repair. He's ultimately executed because of this. I guess Katniss isn't thinking about how this dress will bring punishment down upon her since she's overwhelmed with concern for Cinna, but she should be worried about what could happen to her in the arena now and what Snow could do to her family and friends back home. Snow could think Katniss was in on the wedding dress, and even if he didn't think she knew, he wouldn't care. She still ended up making this huge display of defiance that's firing up the rebels. He's mad and vengeful. Fast forward to Cinna and Katniss's punishment in the launch room. Yes, Cinna's punishment was much more severe in that moment, but it was also a psychological attack on Katniss right before she's getting shoved into an arena to fight for her life. It's so completely devastating. I'm torn on whether or not Cinna knew he'd be executed for the Mockingjay dress. I think he would know this stunt was a huge risk, that he could be imprisoned, tortured, avoxed, or executed, but did he expect to be killed? What do you think? I'm leaning towards he thought he'd be majorly punished, but not executed, or maybe he thought he'd evade severe punishment in time to get on a hovercraft to District 13. Cinna knew all about the rebel plot and plans for Katniss to be the rebel symbol. He'd already designed and created her armored Mockingjay outfits before he died. I forgot to mention this earlier, but Cinna did want Katniss to agree to be the official Mockingjay before she saw the special uniform he designed. According to Plutarch, he made these designs a few weeks or so before the Court of Quell. In Mockingjay, shortly after Katniss agreed to be the Mockingjay, Plutarch showed her Cinna's sketchbook with the design and says Cinna made him promise not to show her it until she decided on her own. Cinna must have felt it was important in this instance to let Katniss make her own choices without pressure from him. But with the Mockingjay dress, which was basically Katniss's pre-launch as the symbol, he didn't take what she wanted into account, which is interesting. I think the Mockingjay dress stunt was sort of a backup plan to martyr Katniss in case she didn't make it out of the arena. That way, the rebel leaders could still use her memory as the symbol to their advantage. By the way, the stylists are with their tributes all morning the day of the games. When they get to the launch room, Cinna braids Katniss's hair for her and gets her dressed in the arena uniform, and he had her Mockingjay pin in his pocket and put it on her. Cinna became the guardian of this pin from the beginning. When a token is something that's worn by a tribute, I can understand why the stylist is involved. Katniss pretty much forgot about it after the reaping, but it really mattered to Cinna, and he went out of his way to make sure she was wearing it. Reminder that in the book, Katniss is allowed to have the pin as her token. It's not a secret the way it's presented in the first movie, where Cinna just goes shh as he preps her for the 74th games. Though the pin did need to get approved by some sort of token review board, and there was some resistance about it since a pin could be used as a weapon possibly. Tokens aren't allowed to give anyone an unfair advantage, but Katniss was allowed to have her pin in the end. In the first games, Katniss thought she was done getting prepped when Cinna pulls the gold Mockingjay pin from his pocket. Katniss had completely forgotten about it and asked where he got the pin, and Cinna explains he took it off an outfit she wore on the train. But Katniss really has no reaction to getting this pin and was unconcerned about having it in the arena. She even tried to give it away to Rue when they allied. Cinna played a big role in getting Katniss associated with Mockingjays. If she hadn't worn the pin in the arena, her only connection to these birds would be her whistle signal with Rue. And even then, it's more tied to Rue. And the Mockingjay pin did come from Madge. She deserves her flowers, but Cinna made it stick with her. It's not a bad thing. It's just interesting to think about. For the longest time, I only thought of Cinna's role in Katniss's Girl on Fire moniker, but he also deserves significant credit for her Mockingjay title. Back to the Court of Quell launch room scene. She says, "My dress was fantastic last night," and thinks to herself, fantastic and reckless, but Cinna must know that. Reckless for you both, girl. Cinna just says, "I thought you might like it," with a tight smile. And then they sit in silence, holding hands until it's launch time. They held hands the year before too, which I found really sweet. Katniss is comforted by physical touch much more than words. Last year, Cinna asked if she wanted to talk, and Katniss just shook her head, and then she held out her hand to him, and he put both of his hands around hers, and they just sat like that. And last year, Cinna gave her some final words of encouragement right before she launched. Remember what Haymitch said: run, find water, the rest will follow. And remember this, I'm not allowed to bet, but if I could, my money would be on you, truly. And kisses her on the forehead and says, good luck, Girl on Fire. This is a very different send-off than they had at the Quell. It started the same. Cinna said, remember, Girl on Fire, I'm still betting on you, and kisses her forehead right before the glass tube came down, separating them. Cinna believed in Katniss. He always had. I don't think those were empty words of encouragement said at out of pity. I really believe Cinna had so much hope that Katniss would make it, that she was special. And I know people are going to get into the conspiracy theory that the 74th Games reaping was rigged by the rebels for Prim because Coin and them somehow knew Katniss would volunteer and they had already picked her to be their revolutionary. It's fine if you like this theory. Obviously, I love overanalyzing these books too, but I personally don't believe in it. And I think if Katniss was pre-picked, it would have been part of the story. A thing that makes Katniss so awesome as a heroine is that she isn't part of the chosen one trope. She didn't have a magical destiny to fulfill, and she's not a prophet. She's a compassionate person with amazing survival skills, and the action she took because of these traits compelled others and gave them hope. All right, back to the launch room. The tube comes down around Katniss. She thanks Cinna and holds her head high the way he always tells her to. I love that tidbit. Cinna encouraged her to be confident and dignified for her own well-being, but probably also part of his agenda to make her this rebel symbol. So she's waiting for the platform to lift her up into the arena, but it doesn't. She and Cinna are both looking at each other in confusion. What happens next guts me every time. It's extremely hard to watch in the movie. Suddenly, the door behind him bursts open and 3 peacekeepers spring into the room. 2 pin Cinna's arms behind him and cuff him while the 3rd hits him in the temple with such force he's knocked to his knees. But they keep hitting him with metal-studded gloves, opening gashes on his face and body. I'm screaming my head off, banging on the unyielding glass, trying to reach him. The peacekeepers ignore me completely as they drag Cinna's limp body from the room. All that's left are the smears of blood on the floor. Sickened and terrified, I feel the plate begin to rise. Once she's fully in the arena and can see the water surrounding her, I can only form one clear thought. This is no place for a girl on fire. I'm obsessed with this line. Absolutely horrific event though. I need to talk more about why Cinna's attack happened in front of Katniss, because this is a deliberate choice I assume made by Snow. Cinna could have been attacked and captured like this after the game started, like in the hovercraft ride back to the Capitol. But then Snow would miss out on a chance to torment Katniss, one of his favorite things to do. He's forcing her to see this while she's in a glass cage, essentially. Katniss is completely helpless to do anything to protect Cinna. Snow is asserting that she is powerless against the Capitol, and what's happening to Cinna could happen to anyone she cares about. And in general, Snow's trying to make her more vulnerable to attack, throwing her off her game as she enters the highest stake game of all. I wonder what Snow hoped would happen right after this when Katniss got into the arena. Like, obviously she'd be at the disadvantage of being extra disoriented and panicked, but did he hope she'd have some sort of episode, like lose touch with reality, or pass out and fall into the water, or have a severe panic attack that made her immobile? What do you think? In Mockingjay, we're told Cinna died during his interrogation, and Katniss, being Katniss, blames herself for his death. And she is not responsible for the choices Cinna made as a rebel. He was an adult. He knew the risks. I'm sure he was committed to help the rebellion, even if that meant he'd die trying. I wonder who else knew about the Mockingjay dress and if it was part of the larger rebel plan for the Quell. Were Haymitch and Plutarch involved in the dress stunt? I think it's possible. The rebels already had big plans to make Katniss the Mockingjay, but I can also see Cinna making this decision on his own as part of his mission to style the Mockingjay. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Katniss was a piece in a game she had no idea she was playing until she escaped the arena. She was furious that Haymitch had deceived her for so long and that Peeta was in danger, of course, but she never felt angry or used by Cinna. And I'm sorry, but he did use her in this grand plan. He had an active, important role in constructing a public persona without her knowledge. I really do like Cinna. I think he is overall a good person, but he is flawed, and all the characters are flawed. That's what makes them so real. Haymitch and Cinna had good intentions, wanting to aid the rebellion for the greater good, but they manipulated and used a teenage girl in the process. It's pretty clear Haymitch felt guilty for what he did to Katniss and Peeta. It was a virtuous mission he helped accomplish, but he got his hands dirty, and I don't think there was any way around that. I'm not sure if Cinna had any guilt about his role, if he had an internal struggle about manipulating Katniss. His story was cut too short to really know, and he was always a little aloof and mysterious. He cared about her, I know he did, but I wonder if he grappled on whether or not to deceive Katniss for the rebel conspiracy. Basically, nobody who had an active role in the rebellion got to the other side of the war with clean hands. It's the nature of war. The good guys also kill people, just in the name of a grander justice. A big message from the series as a whole is that there isn't a perfect line that defines good versus evil, and that having a nuanced perspective is a vital part of humanity. We see character after character making morally gray decisions. There isn't any way around it in most of these high-stakes circumstances. Victors carry the baggage of what they did to survive the arena and struggle with their identities in the aftermath. They have to face the reality that they killed people in order to survive and accept the nuance, the moral grayness. The vast vast majority of the beloved characters in the story killed multiple people, and we, the reader, are forced to think dialectically and recognize their goodness and their flaws, and analyze the motivations of characters and if the ends justify the means. Where do you stand with Cinna? Do you think anything he did was morally gray? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more Hunger Games content and do the thumbs up thing.